East King County PUD. And by the way, I very much appreciate North Lake Unitarian offering us this space, and especially this AV equipment. This is amazing. This is better than anything I've used. So first off, how did we get here? I'm going to talk a little bit about PSE's history and maybe dispel some of the ideas that you might have gotten from reading your power bill. They like to misstate things sometimes. I need to put more lightly here. So first, 1990, we got the first IPCC report. You know, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It established that there's a scientific consensus on global warming, and it's due to emission of greenhouse gases by human activity. And it also predicted that bad things are going to happen if we don't start checking emissions, like, you know, sea level rises and famines and heat waves. Generally bad stuff. And in 1995, there was more data to be had, so they issued a second report. And they gave us an additional conclusion. Climate change might be irreversible in human timescales. Might be thousands to, you know, hundreds of thousands of years before you can fix it. And so we need to start cutting emissions like yesterday. Now, also back in 1996, there was a little power company that some of you may remember called Puget Sound Power and Light. They've been around. They were around for a while, but you know that's kind of a stodgy old brand. You know, look at that logo. Get rid of that and do something more modern. So in 1997, the Puget Sound Power and Light decided to get into the gas business. And they purchased the Washington Energy Company, and with the Washington Energy Company came its entire residential natural gas distribution business. So all the pipes, all of the you know, Greenwood neighborhood explosions, that came from them. I appear to have used the wrong logo. There we go. That's better. All right. Yeah, diamonds were real popular around that time. Enron did actually buy Portland General Electric and then had to divest them when, as tends to happen to companies that have been named the most innovative company in America 6 years in a row. Turns out it was all fraud. So, in 1999, they continued their march into the gas business by purchasing the first combined cycle generation facility. Gas generation facility. I'll first go through the, come on. I've got a pointer here somewhere. I'm trying to figure out how to use it. Excellent. Okay, so these are things that PSE owned when it got started. These are called dual fuel peaker turbines. Try to say that 5 times real fast. What these are gas turbines that can be run off of fuel oil or natural gas. They're generally infrequently run. Most of the time, they're running less than 5% of the time. They're responses to spikes in demand, peaks in demand. That's why they're called peakers. You also have the coal-fired reactors that they've had since the 80s. The small one is Centralia. They own 7% of that. And the big one is Colstrip, which we all know and love. It's the dirtiest plant in the United States. And we also have some hydroelectric facilities that date back to sometimes before the 20th century. I think the Snoqualmie Falls started construction in 1898. But those are not particularly large. Upper and Lower Baker here and the White River facility. And the first combined cycle gas plant was, I believe, but you don't need to know that. So, 2001, we purchased more peaker plants. And also in 2001, the IPCC came back and said the rate at which warming is occurring is increasing. Now, it's not just warming is increasing, the rate at which warming is increasing is increasing. That's bad. Seriously, stop. We're not going to stop, come on. In 2003, they shut down the White River Hydro Plant. Got rid of that. And in 2004, they bought another combined cycle gas plant. 2005, they do something a little different. They put their first wind farm online. and another wind farm, and another combined cycle gas plant. And in 2007, the IPCC came back for the 4th time. And CO2 and methane and ethane levels in the atmosphere are far above normal. Methane and ethane are the 2 components of natural gas. Ice is melting everywhere. The ocean is hotter 2 miles under the ocean. So what are we going to do? Also around about 2007, PSE, which had been publicly traded, it had been listed on the New York Stock Exchange. What was it, NASDAQ? I can't remember. I can't keep my market straight. They were bought and taken private by a private equity-led consortium. The lead of that is the Macquarie Group, an Australian private equity, which you may have heard of. They had a 45%. And some other Canadian private equities and investment funds purchased the rest. And let's see what Steve Reynolds, the former CEO of PSE, had to say about that. If you don't continue to spin, you find yourself in catch-up mode the way we are with roads and bridges. And this is in 2007. We think there's a better model than constantly going back to the capital markets year after year. And by going back to the capital markets year after year, they mean going back to the capital markets and asking the capital markets to give them some more money to buy some more gas plants. Over the next 2 decades, Reynolds said, Puget plans to build 10 wind farms and 10 gas-fired power plants, both to keep up with demand and to meet the company's sustainable energy requirements. 2008, 2009, 2 new gas plants, and we enlarged the existing wind farms again. 2012, another gas plant, another wind farm. And that is the last generation facility that PSE has built or acquired in 2012. 2014, they started building the Tacoma LNG terminal, which is a different use for gas. So, in 24 years, we've gone from this is what they were before they became PSE, to this, this, to that. It's a lot of gas. Some wind too, but they also got rid of some hydro. And that's the thing about PSE's wind power. If you look at how much wind power they generate and how much hydroelectric power they purchase or generate, it winds up being slightly less. They've displaced hydroelectric energy with wind energy. Now, the coal use has remained extremely consistent. They use about the same amount of coal every year. I want to say like 37, 38% of their power comes from coal. Now, the demand has grown a little bit in the area, but that increase was captured by other forms of energy generation rather than coal. Almost all the additional capacity has been gas, but they haven't been using their gas plants a lot because, well, the coal's already bought and paid for. It's sitting there. They're going to use it. And especially if it is cheaper for them to use than gas. That equation changed a little bit, but historically coal has been cheaper. And since PSE has stopped acquiring additional generation, the system reliability, coincidentally, has also started to decline, almost like they're not spending a whole lot on maintenance or personnel to maintain the equipment. If you don't have enough people to respond to outages, the outages last longer. If you don't replace your equipment often enough, you don't do vegetation management, you have more outages. And just this year, they put in for a 9% rate hike. So be prepared for everyone who says, well, I don't know, it might be more expensive to go with PUD. I can guarantee you it will be more expensive to stay with PSE. So this is what their demand over the years looked like. This goes all the way back to 1995, 1996. This is what was owned by PSE, and as I said, the coal use has been extremely consistent, a little bit less hydro, more wind, a lot more gas. And this is what the wind and hydro use is. This also includes electricity that PSE purchases from, they're a big consumer of Chelan PUD's dam output. The other thing is, well, where are we going to get our power from? You're going to get it from another PUD. Yes?
Is the key point
Yeah.
And on the next one, they're using fewer renewables than they were in 2005.
Yep. Well, if you don't call hydroelectric renewable, which they don't seem to want to do, then yeah, it is slightly, and you could say, well, we're generating 1,000 times more, but realistically speaking, non-emitting power, they're using slightly less. They're burning more fossil fuels today than they were 10 years ago, than they were 20 years ago. And this is what their reliability has looked like. These are industry standard metrics. Every utility collects them and sends them to the Energy Information Agency. I don't want to have a whole lot of lines on this graph, but I'll just tell you that this is higher than any of the surrounding utilities. And this trend right here is somewhat worrisome. Now, these particular graphs come from measurements of total outages and total downtime. The state allows PSE to exclude what are called major event days. I think the definition is when more than 5% of your customers have outages. The whole reason for this is to be able to identify long-term trends without those trends being affected by disasters. Like, if you were to look at, say, homicide rates in New York City, it would look like this, and then on this one particular day, it goes way up to 3,500 and then comes back down. 9/11 would be a major event day. So if you wanted to track long-term homicide trends in New York City, you would want to exclude that. But if you are having major event days more and more often, and it's taking longer and longer to respond to them, maybe you should stop looking at them like they're major event days, and rather that they're a common occurrence. There's also some gamesmanship you can do if, say, the standard is, you know, if 5% of your customers are out of power, and you know, you have a lot of days where you have 3 or 4% out, maybe you want to leave those circuits open for longer. Just get above that threshold. But yeah, that is something that should not exist. And as for the expense, the way electrical tariffs work is complicated. It's like doing your taxes. I mean, there's all sorts of different rates and different base charges. So the state just looks at your typical residential bill with 1,000 kilowatt hours. And PSE is generally speaking at the top of that. They're even more expensive than the other investor-owned utilities in the state. And so the question we would have to ask is, what can we do about this? Our utility is not a very good utility, and they're doing things that we don't want them to do. Yes?
Can you speak to the relative reliability between PSE and PUDs for their shows?
I mentioned that briefly, but the other utilities around here are generally speaking, let's see here, I think it was rough, their outages and durations were roughly 50 to 75% of what PSEs were. So they're a lot more reliable. And you can see this yourself. Next time snow hits, hopefully not next week, but if it does, you know, log on to SnowPUD's outage page and then log on to PSE's outage page. PSE has about 3 times the number of customers SnowPUD does. See how many customers are out of power at any one time. It's a fun little game you can play when you're stuck in the house and can't get out because of the snow. There are these things, they're great, especially in a power outage, you can't see anything, you just turn a light on the back. It kind of, well, okay, never mind. So, if we want PSE to do something about all of these bad things, what do? We can't do shareholder activism. You know, you can't show up at their annual board meeting and say, hey, we're going to force a shareholder vote to get you guys to divest from fossil fuels. You can't do that because they're not publicly traded. And to even talk to their owners, you have to go to Canada and the Netherlands. The Australians took their money and sold their share in 2018, so they're currently in yachts off of Australia, which is currently on fire. And the funds that own it are in Canada and the Netherlands. Yes?
Excuse me, Australia no longer has a piece of PSE?
That is correct. They sold their 45% stake in 2018.
Okay, all right.
And yes, Yep, it can be hard to keep up with the stuff. They have a program called Green Direct where you are basically volunteering to buy PSE some green power with your extra money. They have little allotments of wind farms that they will sell off to you. That's not really going to do anything, and you're always going to have like 20% of the population that, you know, like, burn more coal? Yeah, why not? So if we want to get to zero, we're going to have to do it as a community. And PSE, being a power company, is a natural monopoly. Even hardcore free marketeers will tell you that a natural monopoly, there's no reason to compete because the infrastructure necessary to run electricity to everyone's house is extremely expensive. And the upside for two companies doing that is very small. And usually, when you have natural monopolies, they're run by municipalities. Like, you wouldn't want competing fire departments. We tried that and it didn't work. It was very bad. Competing, you know, for-profit water utilities in the UK, complete disaster. It's much better when the municipalities run that, and for power, that's the same way. Every one of our local municipal and PUDs does a better job than PSE and with less money, and they're somehow able to do it by paying their executive team a maximum of like $350,000, as opposed to the $8 million that Kimberly Harris got last year. And additionally, they do report to a regulator, the Washington State UTC, but that accountability is not direct and it's very diluted, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit in the next slide. So this is what the accountability diagram for PSE looks like. So here's us, this little group of people here. We also have the other PSE customers, and then the rest of the Washington State. And we vote for the state senate and the governor, and state senate or the governor nominates UTC members, the state senate approves them, and then the UTC regulates PSE, whereas the private equity fund managers directly direct PSE. And PSE can come back around here and contribute to the campaigns of the governor and the Washington State Senate and help pick their own regulators. Additionally, there's the revolving door problem. PSE has a new CEO as of last week. Her name's Mary Kipp. She was a prosecuting attorney for the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. She was a regulator. Now she's making a lot more money fighting regulators. So getting regulators to be firm with companies like PSE can be difficult. And PSE isn't going to be able to change. Not on their own. Not at all, really. Not as they currently exist. Their primary job is to deliver profits. The UTC usually limits this to about 10% return on equity, and about 7.5% goes to its owners, and 2.5% goes to debt service, people who have lent PSE money. The massive investments in natural gas infrastructure they've made, they just can't walk away from those. They purchased those with the expectation that they would be able to make a certain amount of money off of them. I mean, it's effectively depreciation. They can't just stop using it. They're really still paying for that, if not in absolute terms on the balance sheet. They want to and need to wring their returns out of it. And renewable powers, specifically wind and solar, is intermittent unless you have storage, which as a PUD we could build. But as a gas company that has more gas than it needs, PSE is not going to build. It uses the intermittent nature of wind and solar as a justification for keeping all those natural gas assets. I'm going to click back through here and remind you of something real quick. Both to keep up with demand and to meet the company's sustainable energy requirements. That's PSE's stance. Gas and renewables are coupled, and they cannot be separated. And that's what they're going to tell you, and that's what they're going to insist on until we kick them out. Even if hypothetically they wanted to, even if those gas investments went away, where are they going to get the money to transform it into a clean utility? PSE is a safe investment for its owners. They bought the company for roughly the book value of its physical assets. So even if it completely went under, they couldn't get any more money out of it, they could declare bankruptcy and they'd still get their money back. It's safe. But if you inject a lot of capital into a safe investment, it becomes a risky investment. Nobody's going to want to do that, especially not in the power sector. I mean, even magazines like Forbes are saying, you know, utility investments are a bad bet. And for investors, a dollar profit today is preferable to a dollar profit tomorrow because you can take that dollar and go invest it somewhere else. So they're going to favor the short term rather than the long term. Now, maybe we could do something with the legislature. We passed the Washington Clean Energy Transformation Act earlier this year. There was a big to-do about it. Jay Inslee based a lot of his brief presidential campaign on it. And it's supposedly a big stick, but it's not because it's kind of an empty threat. The state is never going to let the power go out. If PSE can't make its goals, what are they going to do? Okay, you guys are going to pay these fines, and if PSE can't make a profit, they're bankrupt, and at that point they get broken up and sold off. But it's very important to note that the Clean Energy Transformation Act, with the exception of coal, which PSE was trying to get out of anyway, those fines for continued excessive production of natural gas electricity, they don't hit for 10 years. So if PSE hasn't made any progress in 10 years, then we're going to talk about, no, I don't want to do that. We need to get started doing this now. Now, what we're proposing here, and the name of the group, we want to form a public utility district in the east side of King County, where about 20 to 25% of PSE's customers are. A PUD is kind of a special Washington state thing. They exist in other states, but ours are well, they're like consumer-owned utilities. They have a lot to do. They look a lot like fire districts or water districts. They don't, unlike municipal utilities like Seattle City Light and Tacoma Power, they're municipal utilities. They answer to the city council. So when voters want to set power policy or affect power policy, they have to go through the city council to do it. With a PUD, you're electing commissioners directly, and when they do something you don't like, you can vote them out of office. And this isn't a hypothetical. Back in the early 80s, a consortium of PUDs that spent some money very unwisely on a lot of big nuke plants that weren't needed, and I think it was in the 82 election that every single sitting PUD commissioner that was part of that got voted out of office. I would like to be able to do that with PSE, but we don't get to vote. And that's what we're here to do. This is what a PUD accountability chart looks like. Us, the commissioners we elect, the utility. It's very simple. The PUDs in Washington State are overwhelmingly cleaner than Puget Sound Energy is. There are a couple of PUDs that have small gas plants, but PSE emits more carbon into the atmosphere than every single other utility in the state combined. PUDs, as an aggregate, are 95% clean. And this isn't really an accident. I was asked this earlier, how did that happen? It's because PUD's primary concern is keeping the power on. If there's a resource there that you can use to make power and it's relatively inexpensive, or there's a large capital cost up front, but it keeps making you power for a long time, they're going to go for it. With renewables, if the wind's blowing, everyone nearby gets the same amount of wind. It's very difficult to arbitrage renewable energy. Everyone gets the same, well, not everyone gets the same amount of rain, but roughly the same amount of rain in Washington State. You have a lot of rain, there's going to be a lot of hydropower for everyone. And the whole point behind making a profit is you have something that other people don't, and you sell it to them. If everybody has it, there's not much profit in it. So, and also, another benefit of PUDs is they're first in line for federal power projects. There may be some of those coming down the pipe depending on the results, the other results of the 2020 election. We're in good company. We'll be in good company. There are a lot of PUDs in the state. These are all the PUDs that provide electricity. Now, some of them don't provide electricity for everybody. Kittitas only provides provides for the rural areas. But again, there are a lot of them. They've been around for decades, and they do a good job. So we want one of those here. And this is roughly the boundary, or this is exactly the boundaries that we would like to have. The total number of people that live in this particular area is roughly 550,000. There are about 300,000 customers. And if we do successfully make this public utility, we'll be the third largest publicly owned utilities in the state after Seattle City Light and after Snohomish County PUD. And to do that, we're going to need to gather signatures. The requirement is you need 10% of the registered voters that voted in the last election to sign a petition calling for a PUD vote. That's for King County elections has told me that's 27,000 people, but you probably want to collect 35,000 to be safe. But really, we want to collect as many signatures as humanly possible. Collecting signatures, especially as we're going to try to do it, we're going to try to collect signatures from our neighbors. It gives us an opportunity to talk to them before there's the inevitable misinformation campaign from PSE hits. And they every time there's been an electrification effort, PSE parachutes in with an AstroTurf group and a few $1 million. But in this area, this fight is winnable. We can do this. The district we want is surrounded by other public utilities. And we got Chelan, we got Seattle City Light, Snohomish County PUD. If we form it, the only PSE contact we're going to have is on the southern border here, and there are not many circuits that cross that. It's just in the Newcastle and Renton border, and then a few circuits around Issaquah and Sammamish. So disconnecting from the incumbent utility is often a very difficult fight. Boulder's been fighting that for about 11 years now, but Boulder has the municipal borders of a Maryland congressional district. That's one of the reasons they're having a problem. This one is compact, and there's not a whole lot of interconnection. Another factor that works in our favor is that East Side residents voted in favor of I-1631 by about 53 to 47%. As you know, that initiative lost statewide, but it passed here. And the district is one of the most affluent in the state, and the cost of raising money in bond markets for a entity with a tax base like ours is going to be pretty low. And if the stock market for some reason should tank, money will move into bond markets, which makes it even easier to raise money. But financial concerns are only a very small part of this. What we want to do is we want to burn a whole lot less fossil fuel, and this is how we do it. They lose 20 to 25% of their customers. Where's that power going to come from? I mean, they have firm contracts for hydropower, and a lot of these contracts are take or pay, so they have to accept that power or they pay a penalty. Can't really cut, if you get rid of a coal plant in its entirety, but you can't really throttle them back too well. Where it's probably going to come from is natural gas, and maybe getting rid of one of some of the coal plants early. And the important thing with that is you get rid of it and you don't replace it with something else. If you get rid, like they just announced the sale of Colstrip. I don't know how much faith to put in that. This is the second time they've announced that. They announced it back in 1999. They never sold it. But if PSE sells Colstrip and that goes to somebody else and they keep running it and they fill in the gap with natural gas, that has just made our situation that much worse. That's more fossil fuels in the pipe. If we get rid of fossil fuels and replace it with renewables, we're going in the right direction. And until we can build, and this is another thing PUDs can do, they're authorized to build generation facilities. And until we can build or obtain firms, electric supply contractors from renewable generators, we can still purchase power from the BPA and the wholesale markets. And that's where PSE gets 25% of the power right now, it's off the wholesale market. So when somebody says, well, where are we gonna get our electricity? The answer is the same place we do right now. Okay, I will speed it up a little bit. So by building renewable generation and more importantly storage, we need to be able to store that electricity and dispatch it when we need it, rather than just having it when the wind blows and the sun shines. We're cutting carbon emissions from the state's largest carbon emitting utility, probably by about half. Also, PUDs have a lighter regulatory burden. Standing up a new PUD is there's gonna be a lot less institutional cruft, inertia, inefficiencies. We're pretty good at starting efficient companies here on the east side. We've done it before. Bills might not be lower at first, but if we're able to take 7 to 10% of the bill we're paying right now and direct that towards more useful activities like reliability upgrades and renewable power, it's worth it. So the way we get there is we gather signatures and talk to our neighbors. We recruit good candidates for PUD commissioner. The districts are drawn on the map in the back of the room there. And we gather endorsements from influential groups and people. We raise money to fund feasibility studies and advertising campaigns, neither of which are cheap. Feasibility studies, the one that Olympia did, their effort back in 2012 cost them, I think, $40,000. So, not cheap. And then we got to actually win it.
I'm here as one of the commissioners who did that.
Woo!
The only commissioner who's been paid.
Oh, yay!
Could you repeat that?
For water utility, but we have been involved in a public firefight before, as you mentioned, in 2012. So,
Also in 54, right?
goes back to the 60s, the largest debate in the legislature was over public.
Yep.
Could you repeat that? Could
Oh,
you?
sorry. You're Jim Lazar, right?
No, my name is Chris Stearns.
Chris Burns?
I'm a current
Stearns.
commissioner. Mr. Lazar was one of the ones I appointed when he left.
Okay.
He's a close friend, but he's no longer serving.
Okay. So this is a current PUD or a current PUD commissioner down in Thurston County.
Correct.
And did that feasibility study cost y'all about $40K?
That's right, and they're a very good firm.
D Hill?
Yes.
Yeah, the same people Jefferson used.
All right. So does that answer your question, or all right? It didn't. Okay. All right. I'll move on. And once we win the election, then the bigger fight starts. We've got to get that newly formed PUD over the line to purchase all of the existing infrastructure, and they're going to fight that in court. And it might be ugly. So questions? Do we have any questions? All right, we're going to pass the microphone around so that folks can hear, so we don't have to rely on me repeating questions because I'm bad at that.
At what point do we need the money raised by? Will it be before the election?
Well,
Definitely, right?
Yes. The big spending, okay, so our signature gathering deadline is theoretically July 3rd. King County Elections doesn't necessarily know that they'll be able to get everything done if we turn them in at July 3rd, like Island County did back in 2008. That we want to have the signatures done by the end of May, ideally. And at that point, we also need to start raising money then. And it'll be easier to raise money when we have something that is going on the ballot. So right now, we can just pass the hat and, we're going to have more of these meetings, print up more signature gathering forms. It's not a high dollar effort yet, but it will be.
Okay, so we should get the signatures and then raise the money, not do it at the same time.
You can do it at the same time if you can.
And part of that is getting organized to do that. And
Yeah.
before I mentioned the need for volunteers beyond signature gathering, organizing this effort needs resources. We need skilled people to help with that. So if anyone's interested in helping organize the overall effort so that we can plan our fundraising activities more effectively and other things we need to do, it would be incredibly, well, not only helpful, it's critical. So please stand up and step up if you can. Randy.
Really quick, I've talked to a couple of people who are concerned about their quasi